Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back.
JP, I just want to say thank you for sticking it, all of us in the group, to be able to chat and have a conversation beforehand. And I just want to say to everyone that it's going to be a really great conversation tonight. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of it.
Thanks, Cody. It was awesome. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So let's talk about, hopefully I was good. Everyone meet somebody new? I hope so, except for Bill Powell, who just walked in. Hello, Bill, welcome. Nice to see you. So what happened last time? Last month was a pretty amazing month. Hopefully you were able to see it. If not, we do have a recording of it, and we're recording tonight as well, so we can replay it. But we talked about brain science and mental health, and probably the highlight for me at the end of the session was that we went through a individual kind of exercise, and it was just a breath exercise. And what we started is we kind of, this is a, it's not a scientific study here, but we started with asking people stress levels, and about 40 or 54% of us were kind of above the average, if you will. After literally what took less than 5 minutes, maybe it was a 3-minute exercise, the entire group moved down. 88% of us were below kind of the mid-tier level. Amazing shift. And so I highly recommend you go check out that video, practice it. Gunther, who'll be talking later, actually has been doing some of these similar type of practices at home with some amazing results. I've been practicing some of this, especially when I sleep, and it's amazing. So again, I'm hoping to you guys to discover, meet, and really be able to launch things as we go forward. We have an amazing group tonight, and so we want to jump into it as soon as possible. I just met John recently, actually through Cody. He's an extreme athlete, but not just that, he trains other athletes, and not just athletes in kind of the sports sense, but really elite performers, peak performers, whether it's been in Hollywood or athletes themselves. And he's been really working on, a whole lifetime of fitness and expert training. Amazing feats he's been through. I kind of wish, I have definitely like job envy of anybody. I mean, he's what he actually goes do with his clients all the time. So I can't wait for you to meet John. Philip Thomas is Lieutenant Colonel in the Special Forces, has been there for a career. I met Philip about 3 years ago, our first Human Performance Summit, and I am so grateful that Philip is here. He's going to come from the other side of it. So if we have extreme sports, and now we have, ultimate kind of elite tactile athletes, people who their life and death kind of is at hand. So I'm really excited. Thank you, Philip, for being here. By the way, I was supposed to put the kinder picture of Philip, but it didn't really seem to, to match. Gunther Weil. I've known Gunther for maybe 4 years now, and he's become a mentor to me, teaching me a lot about consciousness. And so I feel honored and privileged. Gunther was one of the original core members of the psychedelics research back in Harvard, and worked with Timothy Leary. He is now the founder and CEO of a company called Value Mentors, who we use internally to actually, as a foundational piece, learn our own values. And we use those as we go back out to the community for communication and knowledge. He's a 50-year practitioner in Tai Chi, but all around, he must have lived 15 lifetimes literally in this time, because I am, again, every single time I talk to Gunther, there's a new story. So I'm honored that he's here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk first about flow. This is the flow of tonight. We're going to dive in deep about flow or the zone, and then we're going to have a chance for us all to break out again, have a discussion topic, and then come back and discuss as a group. And then we'll get into shared consciousness, do that same thing, and then psychedelics. So Gunther made a good point. He said, we should probably level set around what is consciousness anyway? Like, what are we talking about here? And I think this is Webster's dictionary definition, the quality or state of being aware, especially of something within oneself. And I'm not going to dive into this and explain it, but I think that's kind of the definition, if you will, this concept of awareness. But another way to look at it is what some of the very top Nobel Prize physicists and scientists over the years have said. Because consciousness, which has not necessarily been easy to measure, seems to be, in their minds, something much larger and much more important. For example, Schrödinger, who won the Nobel Prize in 1933, said consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, where consciousness is absolutely fundamental. right? And then one of my favorites, Roger Penrose from Nobel Prize just recently for black hole, the work that he did on black holes, consciousness is the phenomenon whereby the universe's very existence is made known. So again, we'll dive maybe a little bit more deep into that, since these are pretty renowned people, and maybe a little bit complex to understand right away. So tonight, though, when we're talking about consciousness, often kind of the measure between mental health is set up. And so on one side, there's kind of mental health recovery. So we may have had a head injury or a TBI, or we might have depression or anxiety, or we might have addiction, or we might have PTSD or trauma. And I would say that there's so many benefits of these tools to kind of go from, some kind of deficit or degradation of where our mid state is and get back. Tonight, we're starting the conversation really going forward. If we're in a normal state now, how can we use these tools to increase our performance, to augment our performance, if you will? So again, I think we'll probably get into some of the areas of recovery, but we're going to start our conversation really over here in the performance side. So now let's level set and talk about flow before I get John in here. So flow was actually really researched, I would say, in a big way by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's a Hungarian American scientist, actually a psychologist. And what he basically did is when he started to look at this state of flow, he was describing it as this intersection between when somebody, let's say when I am actually putting myself in a challenge that's extremely high, where my abilities are very, very high. So flow can be seen, for example, in great sports athletes, whether it be a basketball player. I know I feel it when I go skiing. So if I push my limits, if I know I have strong ability, but then I push my limits and make that challenge higher and higher, I get into something that's called this flow state. And we'll talk more about that. But some of the common characteristics are here on the slide: concentration on a task, the clarity of goals, intrinsically rewarding, not extrinsically motivating, but intrinsically rewarding, a balance between challenge and skill. So these are some of the common characteristics of flow. And of course, the question is, okay, how do we get in it? And what does it really feel like? And, let's explore it from a human consciousness perspective. So Emily's going to tee up a poll. Actually, I got it from here, Emily. I'll just do the next poll. Let me show the next poll, because we want to know where you're at. We want to know your flow knowledge and experience. So go ahead. I go ahead and launch that poll for you. Just take a minute and click one of those. All right. Great. We're just about at 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now, and I'll share these results. So again, it looks like we've got a good group here, right? It looks like almost everyone has experienced it, but still we have a real opportunity to kind of move the level. So hopefully by the end, when we check back in next month, everyone's gone out and been able to kind of jump in or experience some kind of flow. So with that, I'm going to welcome John to the stage here. John, you want to jump in?
Everybody hear me okay? I'm good?
Yeah, you're good. Welcome, my friend. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. And Cody and Emily, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So I will start about my kind of flow experience and the transition from not even knowing what it was or anything like that to ultimately how do you recreate it? And then show you guys a video at the end here. So this studly young man is not me. That's my buddy, Dan. And I get a call, and Dan is a top-notch professional mountaineering guide, ski instructor, snowboard guy. I mean, he's done everything. He's lived all over the world. He's climbed every mountain, Denali multiple times, Aconcagua. So he calls me and he says, hey, you want to come climb? My client canceled. And I said, yeah, when are you going to do this? And he's like, in a couple of days. You got to come now. And I was like, all right, great. I'm on my way. And I was like, what are we doing? He said, well, we're climbing East Buttress and Mount Whitney. And I was like, okay, that's I climb, but that's a big climb. That's a traditional rock climbing, big vertical face, kind of scary, have to know what you're doing. And I said, well, are you leading the climb? And he said, yeah, I'll get you up. You're good. You're solid. And I said, all right, okay. So we show up and get there, and it literally is like, as usual with a good friend, you unfortunately don't prep the way you probably should. We ended up sitting in a bar and telling stories. We were supposed to be up on the mountain in a tent preparing for the alpine start the next morning. We were still down in Lone Pine, California at the local bar listening to country music and hanging out and having a good time. So needless to say, we started the morning way behind schedule, raced up the mountain. It was crazy trying to get there in time, even get to the bottom of the climb. Luckily, it was dark because I could not see what I was going to be climbing the next morning. We're sitting in the tent. He says, hey, do you know how to do escape the belay and everything? I'm like, yeah, I think I will. We should practice. Okay, let's do it. Next morning, we get up. I'm just like, what am I doing? I'm totally like over my, fear, anxiety, all those things start creeping up. Walk up, get out of the tent. I'm looking up at this thing and just being like, oh my God, what am I actually really doing? This is crazy. Dan's like, come on, we'll do it. We can do it. And I was like, all right, okay, we're leading. I trust you. And we get to the bottom of this climb. There's other people there. They're getting ready to start. One of the last things you want is someone climbing right above you when you do a big climb. So Dan's like, and just starts going. And I'm not even roped up yet. He's just going. And I'm like, whoa, okay, I got to get my door on. And all these things just started to click. There's like a moment where you're like, okay, got to do this, got to do that, I got to run this. Okay, cool. We got our communication going. Next thing I know, I have literally forgotten most of the time. And where this picture is right here is one of the times that Dan said, hey, we should take a picture. This is literally like one of the only pictures on the whole climb. We started to get into this where we weren't communicating in words. It was a feeling. I knew exactly when he was going to be off belay or needed a little more rope. So it's things, if you're rock climbing, you start to pick up. You get a sense of these things. And we got just above this moment right here. Dan looks at me, says, hey, let's do simul climb. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. And he's like, it's where we climb together and we put some protection between us. It's a pretty advanced technique of climbing. You got to be really kind of careful. You have to know each other's capabilities, because basically if I fall, he gets pulled off the climb. If he falls, he pulls me up. And there's no like belay you would usually use in climbing. So, I trust this guy. He's like one of my great friends. We had this implicit connection with each other. I said, let's go. We hit this just where time, literally, as we'll talk about in flow, time kind of disappears. Like you lose the sense of time. You lose the sense of almost like a feeling of being in your body. You're just moving and you're in this rhythm, and it's this neuro cocktail that kind of comes out that I think is really interesting. And we got to the summit, which is this next picture here. Let's show that one. And the funny thing was, is we're coming up to the summit. We had no idea. We had absolutely no clue that we were at the summit. And I heard this cell phone ring, and I'm like, what is that? I mean, it literally pulled me out of this zone. And what you'll see is we're standing on top of this mountain. I don't know if you guys are able to go to the next slide there, but it is just like, wait, we're on the top of the mountain. We just climbed this, 1,800 feet, traditional climbing, dialed in. We got there super quickly. I mean, it was amazing how fast we were able to get to the top of this climb. And it's like we had this moment where we're like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing in the world. Well, that is always, that moment has always kind of stuck with me. And I'm like, well, how do you recreate that? How do you connect to that again? How do you get to this place where all these neurochemicals are coming together, the body's together, your consciousness is expanded in a sense that you know what's going on with your partner, you know what's going on with the feeling, the energy of the climb, everything like that is all connected to you at that moment. And so I wanted to ultimately try to recreate that. Now, here's the next slide is my wife has a habit of doing things where I think she's trying to kill me. I'm not sure 100%. I kind of trying to figure this one out because she keeps getting me these presents, these gifts. And she's like, oh, honey, I got you a 6-day survival course where you're basically by yourself for 6 days. Oh, I got you this, I got you that. And I was like, okay. So that's just my funny picture of me that I sent back to her and I said, yeah, you got me, you killed me, took me out. So I get this gift for a birthday, and it's this thing called Surf Ranch. And I'm like, oh, what is Surf Ranch? I look it up, and it's this man-made wave. It's Kelly Slater's place that he's created. And the wave is this, as you can see, is a pretty big size wave. It's got a lot of power. It's got a lot of height to it. It's got a lot of like volume of weight that moves. Let's just say I'm a beginner surfer. I'm an absolute beginner surfer. Like pretty much I suck at surfing. I don't call it surfing. I call it falling. And so I'm like, wow, how am I going to do this? And so I sat back and I thought about it, and I was like, well, let's think about flow. What does it mean? And I started researching flow, and I started researching like, how do you create this neural cocktail? How do you connect your body to this? How do you get in a sense, expand your, magnetic field, your consciousness to a larger body, right? So I started reading a lot of quantum physics because I'm a science person. I kind of like to see like, is this real? Like, what is this stuff? Could I really get there? And you start to get into it. And you start realizing, certain things that now are starting to, I think are becoming more evident in some of the research, which is, a particle can exist both as its particle and as a wave, right? It can be in a superposition. It can be in this field, right? And some of the stuff we're learning, like as we observe this, it collapses that field, for lack of better terms, and there's this particle, right? So it's like matter in a wave, a field, energy can be kind of both. And I was like thinking about that, and I was like, well, okay, so if I can connect to this field, could I observe something that I want to have happen, and could it happen, right? Could I collapse that to me? Could I bring that experience back to me? And could I do it without actually getting in the water? Because I have 3 kids and a life and crazy stuff, and I can never get out surfing. I have a surfboard that sits in my garage in a nice, beautiful bag, and looks brand new because it is. And so I started thinking, I was like, well, how do I do this? What are the strategies? Like, what are actual real strategies to move this thing from, energy and vibration into matter, a real experience that could occur? And so I started using some techniques, which, we talked about kind of last time in this forum is breath work. And I started to read about how you want to connect the mind and the body together, right? So you're trying to connect the heart, the energy off the heart and the mind, and you're starting to create this kind of where you're getting into what's called a gamma brainwave. And as I started to play with this kind of stuff, I could feel in essence, like my body dissolving. I could actually focus and be connected. And it really actually feels like you're connected to a bigger energy out there. And then as I started to learn more and more, I started to think about, well, if this is a thought and I want this thought to occur, that's an electrical signal. An emotion is kind of a chemical signal. I want to connect this emotionally. Like I want to feel what it's like. I want to feel the experience before it's even happened. I want to feel what it'd be like to succeed in this, what it'd feel like to be, surfing in a barrel, in a tube, right? And that was the thing, like everybody talks about in this thing is like, I want to get in the barrel. I want to be like that. I want to feel that. And I was like, okay, I want to experience that before I go. I want to do my imagery work. I want to do all the stuff I do with athletes, but it all occurs by backing up and establishing this breath foundation and this coherence between your heart and your brain, right? And once you can get there, then that's when I think you're in that space that you can actually start to create things that will really happen. And so I did other things too that I do with all my clients and my athletes and stuff like that, is like I started using things you would do, balance boards, mobility training, ankle training, all the athletic, physical stuff. I do a lot of vestibular training, which is like inner ear balance stuff, you know, so you're doing brain drills where you're moving eyes and ears at the same time to try to create this environment. And I sat and imagined, I felt it. And so we go to Surf Ranch, and Surf Ranch is its own unique place. The wave comes very fast. Like I was saying, it's very loud. It's like there's a train almost that moves up above with this like sled that drives the wave up really big, and it comes up very quickly. And then it's really powerful, and there's concrete underneath it. So there's a lot of fear. You know, there's a lot of things like, I don't want to get slammed by this thing. And one of the guys that's on the trip is this guy named Romania, who's from Tahiti, and he's Kelly Slater's like jet ski guy. And Romania is kind of a crusty guy. Kind of doesn't, he doesn't put up with any BS from anybody. And so he, as we come out there, he looked at me and he's like, do you know how to surf? He's like, you need to go practice on the side, like just practice getting up on your board. And I was like, no, I'm okay. And I was like, I've thought about it and felt it. Like, he looks at me and he's like, okay, well, let's go see what you do. First wave comes, it's big, slams everybody because no one's used to the pace and the size and how quickly it comes up. He rides a jet ski up next to me, he looks at me and he's like, okay, let's go. I'm going to get you. And here's another moment where it's like, I'm sure we'll talk about the discussion about how you don't even think about like the consciousness, like the discussion with each other in verbal ways. I just knew I was connected to him, and I knew he had me, and I was like, let's go. And so then this is, if we want to play the video, so this is literally the second wave, if you guys can see it. Hopefully it's not too dark. So I'm here on the corner and I'm paddling in, and you'll see him come in on the jet ski. Oh, it's a little slow, a little freezing there. It's okay, we can talk about it. So he's on the jet ski on the front and he's yelling at me. And in this moment of like where I've connected, I can hear him, I can feel him, I can tell exactly where he is. I don't even need to see him. And he's like, sit. And I catch this barrel and I'm inside the barrel, and you come out of it and you're just like, I was like, ooh, because it's exactly how I perceived it, felt it, imagined it, and, you know, kind of created it beforehand. So those are things I think about, like, can we do this? Can we practice this? Can we create a system for it? Can you master this in your daily life, right? And I think that's the stuff ultimately, like, if we can grab hold of this and we can do this, we can improve not only ourselves, but humanity too. I mean, that's the bigger piece of it. So anyway, I know I'm probably running out of time. I could talk forever about flow and cool stuff like that. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
John, a great experience. Thank you for sharing. I'd love for you guys to jump in a little bit. Philip, maybe we were hearing John talk a lot about like this training, and in this case it was a wave, but maybe describe a little bit about your training that you do in your work, and is there any comparisons there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm listening to some of the stuff John's saying is, you know, as a great opener, John. But listening to a lot of stuff he's saying in getting into my line of work, but also my line of study, a lot of what he's getting at is self-regulation. And what I mean by that is your self-regulation is your, you know, for lack of a better term, because this is not a college class or anything, but my ability to stay on a task and keep all my focus right there. And so some other things that kind of jumped out at me, he's talking about kind of imagining how this is going to be and everything. And we work with our guys quite a bit on imagery, especially on a complex task or whatever. You know, you don't have to have the weapon system in front of you. If you've memorized all the parts, you can go through those things, and next time you get your hands on that gun or that weapon system, they can kind of get into a flow for, you know, and work that through because they've actually imagined that. So we do a lot of things with attention control, imagery work with our guys whenever they go through the training. And then he made another point as far as the brain and the heart being connected. We know things go sideways once your nervous system, once those two things get out of whack, forget about it. Your self-regulation's out the window. Now, if I've taught you to self-regulate, now you're worried about how fast you're breathing and all those things, and you're not focused on the task. So the minute the brain and the heart disconnect, you've got issues, especially if you're not trained to try to get back into that as soon as possible. So anyway, self-regulation, imagery, attention control, brain, heart, all those things are very basically come right over to my line of work as well, and the way we train our students, and in the training I've been through in the past as well. I don't know if I answered your question, JP, but
no, it's great. I'm curious about experiences too. Like Gunther, what comes up for you when you hear this? I mean, obviously you've seen a lot of folks over time, whether it be musicians or athletes or even, academics. Talk to us about what you're thinking.
Relating this to my, to my own life, I remember quite a few years ago, playing basketball in high school and then in college, and experiencing intermittent flow states without really knowing what they were, other than feeling really good, feeling, in the zone, and being able to perform pretty well when those states arose spontaneously without any intentionality around that. As I say, not even really recognizing what it was that took over. Some years later, when I was in graduate school in Harvard, starting my PhD program and walking into the building to meet my faculty advisor, who happened to be Timothy Leary, who described to me his experiences the summer before in Cuernavaca, where he took mushrooms with a curandero there, and how that changed his life. And how his focus in psychological research had completely shifted as a result of that he was interested in consciousness. And he asked me if that was something I was interested in doing, then he'd be happy to be my advisor. If it wasn't, then I should find somebody else. And of course, or maybe I shouldn't say of course, but I naturally said, sign me up. That was a function of a lot of different aspects of my own background that led me to that. So my first experience of sustained flow was in my first psychedelic experience, which happened just a couple of weeks after meeting him. And the recognition of that was quite extraordinary. It lasted 4 or 5 hours, and it was continuous. And of course, then the inference that comes from that is, okay, well, the way to repeat that is to continue to take psilocybin or whatever the psychedelic is or was. And I believed that for a while, actually for a few years. But then it became increasingly clear to me years later that that was not correct. That the psychedelics offered a window into flow, into consciousness, a flow state of consciousness, provided a kind of what I would call a similitude, a simulation of that, and that the real work had to come afterwards.
Yeah,
and so
it's interesting. So what we'll do is let's dig into a little bit more on flow states that you guys have experienced before, and then Gunther, what we'll do is I want to actually dedicate a whole section to dive into the psychedelic stuff in just a little bit, but
sure.
Let's dive in. Cody, I know you're a student of this stuff. Talk to us about what you've seen, especially whether it be astronauts or other elite performers in your space.
So I mean, I think the resounding conversation of flow is similar no matter where you go, right? As we increase and ratchet up skill, typically we're going to then ratchet up the environment to which you're going to try and risk that skill or place those people into it. Obviously from a space environment, it's a mission critical team. And so from that standpoint, every decision that has to be made must be made in a situation that could have, critical valued choice trees to the rest of the team. And I think that although, pushing it way over there, we could keep going down that line. I also play video games, and I want to throw it this direction for the point of saying, like, it's not always right, like a physical thrust. It's not always a completely, chemical overhaul. There are, opportunities where you can place stressors in different perceptions based on the environment that you're in, right? So it's just trying to put you on the edge of, again, that skill to problem ratio, which allows us, as John was talking about, right, to find ways to play with the game outside of the space. But the difficult part is that we start to kind of have this relationship between saying that, if I can get into flow in a video game, it's just as easy to get in flow when I go learn a new skill. And that's not necessarily the apples to apples relationship. Right. And I think that that's something that's been extracted from the conversation that John kind of threw out of saying that, being connected to the climber, right? You're expanding yourself in these other portions of the environment, which means that the environment is indiscriminate of the choice tree to get into flow, right? You can pick an environment as long as you then turn that environment into something that's really stimulating to you and really valuable to you, right? And then inject your awareness into that situation. Do you enter that flow state? And so as Gunther and Phil were talking about, right, like those different environment people conversations, or trying to work on it yourself, right? Like that piece, I think, is definitely what I've noticed in trying to extract from the different pieces I played with, is just how we actually have all these native tools to reach those, outcomes.
Right. The task and the intrinsic kind of motivation for it. John, have you turned around and been able to teach some of your clients this, or how do you use flow in your everyday?
Yeah, I mean, Cody's exactly right. Like if the environment doesn't have a sense of, I mean, you can create this in your own mind too, but it doesn't have a sense of like intensity, for lack of a better word. It's like, it can be difficult to create a flow state if you're, doing laundry, right? I mean, it's going to be more challenging. It's going to take a lot more effort. I personally think, though, just in my own experience and with the athletes too, is like, you have to set up a system, a foundation, a way of trying to repeat this behavior, right? You don't want to just go willy-nilly out there and see if you can be in a flow state and do something dangerous, because that can in a pretty bad disaster. So I always say, like, you have to be aware of yourself, right? You have to be aware of your environment, your connection, the feelings together, like Cody's saying too, and I was saying, like, the coherence, and Philip was saying too, like, if you're out of coherence, you're in a fight or flight state, kind of. In that sympathetic state, you're usually not breathing as well. There's all the stuff we talk about with breathing, like CO2 and O2 ratios are off. You literally can't connect to a bigger thing. You can't expand the field. I think, like, from Stanford, I think Dr. Tillerman did that with actually measuring the size of the electromagnetic field coming off of you. And if you're able to resonate together and these pieces were able to come together, you could create a bigger field. So people even coming in that were in love together, they would come into a room, they'd have a bigger field, right? Because there's a coherence in the waves, right? So waves were, you don't want them to cancel each other out. You want them to amplify, and love, gratitude, those kind of things tend to amplify those waves. And people that were, they had convicts coming, people angry, pissed off, all kinds of stuff, and their field was a lot smaller. And to me, that's like, I think that's where all this stuff goes. If our field's big and is expanding, I can connect to Cody, right? Our fields can come together, and we can actually have this kind of communication that's at a different level than just verbal talking. And, I think that's where ultimately we got to go. We got to figure out how we can all connect in that way. So yeah, my athletes do it. They learn to breathe. They learn to connect to their body, their heart, their mind, plan good intentions, feel emotions. There's a bunch of stuff I do, like steps to it, a system. So
yeah, I just want to remind the audience too, if you have questions, you can drop them into the into the chat here, and we'll try to keep track of them. Actually just 2 comments right away, which was, somebody actually just messaged like, hey, I get into flow when I'm writing, right? If they're, again, I think the idea of a task that's challenging, but super intrinsic. Another one here, an artist said, listen, music and art and dance, these are the moments when you can lose consciousness. I'd be curious, anybody here else, like, is that the trick? And you said, I obviously don't do something really dangerous, but what is the, when you guys are thinking about this, and maybe Philip, start with you again, do you train it? Or do you not talk about it? Kind of this idea of getting into flow.
To be quite honest, I don't think we use the term flow that much at the schoolhouse. We use it in a different context from time to time when it does vector into the context we're talking about. But when we talk about flowing through a house, if you're going to do direct action to take down a house or whatever, you're flowing through a house. Those small teams of guys do kind of get into a flow state, but they're talking about flowing through the house. And I'll get into a little more how we train in the next section, but sure. we really don't talk about it a lot. And so it is a little bit odd. Now we do in certain niche places, I think like Range 37, where they're doing a lot of high-end marksmanship. Some of the folks across the fence, some of those things may be a little more, but your M1A1 Special Forces soldier going through the qualification course isn't really getting a whole lot of talk about flow. There's a lot of building block stuff, but that's it.
I'd like to ask a question of my colleagues here, you guys, particularly John and Philip and Cody or anyone else. Do you find that flow is a byproduct of a set of circumstances and activities and actions, or is it something that you seek directly as an end goal in itself?
I mean, I think it's both in an interesting way. I think people seek it out in an athletic performance or like some, a musical performance or something in art. But I also think like you could create that state too. I mean, it could be, I've listened to music and there's a flow state because the music moves me and it connects me. You know what I mean? So I think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other. I think you definitely, I'm seeking it because it's a cool place. I think you can learn at a faster clip there. I think you can make different connections, tangential connections faster. I think you can find patterns faster. Some of the people I know that are in some of the, like Cody and I were talking about some of the special operations community too, like Philip, you were alluding to, like, I know these guys like in DevGru and stuff like that, they're looking to do those things, right? They're looking to make these connections and problem solve. And as Cody and I were talking a little bit earlier, they have to understand the human better than anybody else. And
to lean into what you're saying, when we start talking about flow, I think a lot of confusion, builds up around the idea of, the adrenaline fueled sports version of it, and what that is. And I think there's a definition between hyper-focus and flow that are, slightly different as far as how you're actually performing an activity, whether you're just responding as a reactive agent to your environment because you're so well trained to execute, or if you've actually entered a kind of aware conversation with that decision tree, right? Like, that you are going to use some reactive skill sets that you're built for, but you're still kind of maintaining the ship while at a high performance threshold. And so I think, most times, because of the energy demand that we have to try and get into that space, when we're inefficient at a task, it kind of forces us to get anxiety ridden and fueled in a way that prevents us from actually getting to that level of performance. But when you're really efficient at something, you can actually stretch, I think, that barrier a little bit further to actually explore where you're still functioning as we are right now, right? I think that's the difference. Like that you mentioned, Gunther, is that it's not the drugs necessarily, it's not the breathing necessarily, it's the whole encompassing factor of understanding that you're trying to create an efficiency set with yourself, that mental imagery, the practice, the skill, the repetition, to allow yourself to reach further and further and further towards the sun, like Icarus, right? On this thin veil of the maximum energy you have.
Yeah, I agree with all that. John, you said it could be both. I think there is something to that. I think the way, Gunther, to your question, kind of the way we train and the way we've got to take someone from like this raw material up to a pretty elite soldier. And then even after they go to their groups, then they go to the special teams, and then they may go across the fence or whatever. They just keep getting better as a soldier. So at the schoolhouse, I would say we kind of look at it more of a building block, or it's kind of a byproduct. Hey, if you do these things, when you get put into that situation, Cody, to your point, you not just reactive, your anxiety, you can still have not your blinders, but you can still see everything going on and still take care of business, whatever needs to happen. So I think we look at it a lot of times, at least through those first several stages, as kind of a byproduct.
Yes, I would just comment on my own question, because in my experience, efforting to achieve flow actually gets in the way. And if you look at the research, for example, it's been around a number of years now, what's called the default mode network, which is characterized basically by self-referential thinking based on memory and future thinking. So it's past thinking or anticipating the future. Neither of those actually involve the present moment. You are identified, with your history or with your expectations about the future. And it's characteristic of a lot of dysfunctionality, primarily addiction, but other kinds of neurotic states as well. So to make that connection, to become free of the DMN, the default network, you have to surrender your obsession with your own progress, your own self. So it's very paradoxical, but the quality of for example, of relaxed attention, right? Which is almost a contradictory idea, because in the West, for example, relaxation is normally associated with watching the telly with a can of beer, or laying on a couch. It's very, in contrast, for example, in Chinese martial arts, there's a word called sung, S-O-N-G, or S-U-N-G. And it refers to a state of relaxed attention. So everything is mobilized, but it's mobilized in a parasympathetic context. So, you could describe it as an aspect of situational awareness. There's an expansion of awareness. There's a sense of spaciousness. There's also simultaneously an attention to detail, and a number of other characteristics of that, including the suspension of time or the elongation of time. But along with that, flow can happen spontaneously. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen. So for me, it's laying the groundwork and then kind of surrendering it to the universe or God or Buddha nature, or whatever word you want to use. There's an aspect of surrender, of surrendering your own will here and your own efforting, which is hard for us as Westerners. Competitive, emphasized on productivity, all of that to get out of our own way.
Gunther, can I ask a question on this? So,
Cody, what we're going to do those. I got to keep moving. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a breakout as a perfect launching point, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bring everyone back in. So everyone, put your cameras back on. We're going to use the magic of Zoom to send you out to a breakout room, and then you'll be coming back in just 6 minutes. All right, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. So this is a chance really for we'd love to hear back from you all. So, the idea is how putting this into work in your business and your practice and your family and the people around you, your services. Love to hear from a couple of you, just what came up. First one's always the bravest. Don't make me call on you, Bill.
I'll jump in here. I'm never scared of being foolish. Yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff. I spoke to being jealous that you find a flow state while you're writing, as I've tried to write a little more in a little more focused way, pardon the pun. We also talked about how business and a group of people, how it's very different to think about a team or teams moving through a house and kind of having an awareness and a joint flow state with people versus how we're currently operating based on COVID and dealing with, trying to figure it out on Zoom, especially when people maybe don't even have their cameras on. So we covered that amount of space. And now we're ready for you to answer, to help us figure it all out.
Well, JP, can I jump in?
Please.
So I hijacked the breakout as I usually do, you know me. But because my question was, we all talk about flow, but my question was, what about your partner? What about your community? What about your team? Flow is very individualized. What happens if someone in your partner or your team is not in flow? And then, Matt and Sky we got into that discussion, but I hijacked the discussion a little bit to talk about individual versus team or partner.
Well, I think that's good. It's going to get into our next discussion. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of extend on that. That's a good one. I know that actually, Scott, you and Jennifer's here too. One of the companies that we've been helping out is actually a company with a couple entrepreneurs here. They've been actually building an app, trying to basically digitize the getting into flow, but not just for elite athletes, but for youth athletes. Do you guys want to just mention that?
Sure. I'm Scott Ford, and I've been teaching athletes, tennis players mostly, how to get in the zone for a very long time. And I'm using a technique that I actually stumbled across by accident way back, and have been developing it as a system for training athletes of any skill level or any age and in any sport, how to get into the zone on purpose, to intentionally generate these flow experiences by getting their system, if you will, to connect to the entire field of operation. We've got this operating system that's capable of doing so many things, but we don't generally connect it to the whole operating field. We'll connect dualistically to the different parts of the field, but we won't unify with the whole field. And that's the kind of stuff that when we can train athletes to be able to unify with the entire field, and they have all of these different skills that they're doing. The problem-solving skill in tennis is to make positive contact with the ball. Well, it gets really complex at times at high levels of tennis. And being able to solve that problem at really high levels is a lot easier if you can get into a flow state where time seems to be slowed down a little bit. And you've got more time to do everything, and then everything seems to come together. One of the things that we were talking about, and I think it was Rich was talking about being a high school coach and having a time when he was just watching and his whole team was coming together. And that's like the team flow that Michael, you might want to you're interested in. But what we're doing is developing an app that essentially digitizes the flow experience. And when we can digitize it, then we can sort of democratize it and get it to every athlete in every sport, kind of all over the world.
Yeah, what I love about what you're working on is just that the idea is one thing for us to have it be in the school house or for elite athletes, but the idea of getting it to, giving that experience of flow for any, youth athlete at any age, anywhere. I mean, it's phenomenal. So,
One of
I'm
the
super excited to
things
see what's going to happen there.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see young kids, 7, 8 years old, getting in the zone. Not only do they learn their game faster, but they really have a lot more fun. And that keeps bringing them back. And of course, they improve faster when they're in this flow state than when they're in the normal kind of egoic state where you're just constricted all the way. So yeah, it's really an exciting time for us. Jennifer, you want to anything?
I was gonna throw in there that I think this is sort of a renaissance of sorts, because I think ancestrally we were far more apt to live and operate in a flow state, in a more intuitive and a more instinctual state, because we had to for survival. I think our education system has sort of systematically trained us away from operating intuitively, because we're so hung up on, and just as it is, the science is improving things and the right answer. And I think we are less comfortable than we really should be. I think as a species, we've kind of moved away from functioning that way. So I think the resurgence of it is going to really bode well for the younger people, because they're going to be aware of it from a very early age and theoretically not be trained only left brain, but be trained right brain and left brain, and be able to tap into that so much easier than those of us who have not thought about that, except for when we've accidentally fallen into it and thought, holy shit, that's so cool. How do I do that again?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And one of the things that I'm excited to do in this next part is kind of dig in even further on some of those topics. I love the Renaissance comment. I think we're maybe at a time where we can actually have the wherewithal to kind of dig in and learn more about these opportunities. So here's what we're going to have to do. We're going to jump back into the panel. There was a question here literally from one of the groups that said, if you can get into flow on demand. So I appreciate that already comment answered. We are a little bit behind, which always seems to happen in these conversations, because which is okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of merge these next sessions together. So we were going to break up the shared consciousness, which we'll start with, and then we were going to talk about psychedelics, and then we're going to break out in between them. But let's actually merge these a little bit together. Philip, I'll have you start on the shared consciousness, and then after a little bit in this conversation, I'll jump in and set the framework maybe for psychedelics, and then we'll jump right in there, and then we'll have another breakout.
Sounds good, JP. Thank you. So I'm not sure if I'm in a flow state right now or not. The more I hear the conversations going, I change my talking points, because there's just so much to cover. So it's not surprising that we're a little bit behind, but some really great conversations and some really great follow-up conversations to come, hopefully. So the first thing I'd like to do is kind of set the stage a little bit. And JP's already done that as far as kind of introducing me and everything. But long story short, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. Civil engineering background, defense analysis, irregular warfare, masters, and then industrial organizational psychology, PhD. So in my PhD, I actually did my deep dive on individual differences and self-regulation. So we've been talking about flow and consciousness and all these things. Well, there's some fundamental building blocks that are out there that we know quite a bit about in the literature. And I'm not here to preach to you and or teach to you. I'm going to kind of throw out a lot of things, a lot of topics that I think, JP, I think it'll help spark more conversation as far as, hey, how does that come into play? How does this come into play? So and I've already talked to some of John's points. At the schoolhouse, one of the things I have some performance psychologists that work there. I don't work there anymore. I'm down in Florida now. I'm working synthetic training environments and some of those things. But you can't separate that from human performance, because if you're doing virtual training and all those things, I got to figure out making sure that's transfers and all that. So when I tell my performance psychs and the cadre, that's our trainers there at the schoolhouse, it's like, hey, look, you give me a self-aware, self-regulated, adaptable soldier with the baseline capabilities, we can work with that from there. We can train this cat as long as he or she has shown that they have the baseline capability. And by the time they get out of selection, that's about a 3-week course where they just get beat down. They come out the other side of that and get selected. They've demonstrated they've got the baseline capability at least. So then we just have to work with them. We have a lot of challenges there, and it gets into self-regulation and all these things. Gunther pointed it out, the relaxed state of focus. Well, how relaxed do you think you are if you've got a cadre yelling at you, and then you can tell me you're relaxed, but if I put a machine gun in front of you with about 45 parts and say, put that together, you're going to look at it, even if you know what it is, and go, okay, I'll put it together. But as soon as I put a stopwatch and a beeper next to your head and go beep, the brain and the heart disconnect automatically. If I want to induce stress, it's the simple sound of a beep will do that for the students, and then they can't focus. And it gets to Gunther's point. You've got on task and off task. And the next thing you know, they're working on, they're starting to think about what they've been taught about self-regulation and all this stuff, attention. They're thinking about that. That's off task, and it spirals downhill. So that kind of sets the stage, managing expectations a little bit. I'm not a expert in flow or consciousness for that matter, but what I'd like to talk about a little bit is mental models. We all have our mental models. So whatever tasks that's out there, if let's say it's washing your car, you have a mental model for how you prepare and go wash your car. Well, there's team mental models. So for us, team mental models. So if I have to teach a task, and it's a lot of our tasks, we have lots of tasks, so that becomes even more difficult. But if I just going to say enter and clear a room, okay, that means you're going to go up to a door, blow the door off, whatever, and go in and clear that room. And then you can use your imagination for what that means, but you got to go into this building, you don't know what's in there, and clear it. So the mental model is everybody on that team, they have to have a declarative knowledge of what steps have to take place. That is, so when we're teaching these things, we have to teach them team mental models. So we're trying to get them all to understand what takes place in X task. The next topic that comes into play is what they call a transactional memory system. It's not much different from computer programming or anything like that, but that gets into more of your structure and your process. So John's on my team. He's the weapons guy. JP's the commo guy. I'm the officer. Gunther's the medic. So now whenever we have information come in, it's the structure and the process for me to know exactly who needs that information the most. And so everybody's clicking and everybody says, okay, I've got a weird problem here. Who would know that? Oh, this gun's broke. John knows it. He's my Bravo. And Gunther knows this because, so that's kind of the next level. So it's one thing to have your declarative knowledge, your team mental model. Your second level is your structure and your process. And the more we can structure that and teach them, hey, here's who needs to know these types of things. In the schoolhouse, they don't necessarily stay together long enough to get really good at it. But by the time they get to their teams are all the same structure. They have two commo guys, two gun guys, two engineers, two docs basically. And so everybody kind of knows who needs what. All right, so I'm not even going to get any further into that. So you got these memory models that we've built for the team, or we've tried to train them, and we've tried to teach them, hey, here's how you share information, and here's how you keep from trying to take all this in as the officer or the guy in charge of the team. Then you get into situational awareness, and I think this will get some folks going on some of the conversations. So situational awareness, what is that? And that's, if you go back to the definition of consciousness, it sounds a whole lot like that, right? It's you're being conscious of your surrounding. Well, here's the problem that you can run into, especially on high risk teams and things like that. Guess what? Situational awareness relies on your perception and your comprehension of what's going on. So John and I enter a room, John's highly trained, I'm not. He's perceiving it as, oh, there's only one dude in here with a gun. That's not too bad. And he's doing it, and I'm freaking out. So our perception of the situation is totally different. So you got to train the teams to kind of perceive things similarly. Otherwise, they're never going to be in sync. And that's why when you talk about DevGru or Delta or even our SF teams that are specialty into that type of stuff, they all kind of perceive the situation very similarly, and they comprehend it very rapidly. And I know that we have a saying in our line of work, when you go into a room, the number one man is never wrong. Okay. So it means there's certain ways you should enter a room, but if John goes right as the number one man, he's right. He's correct. So I go left. I don't stop and go, hey man, you actually, based on where this door was in the wall, you should have went left. You can talk about that later, but the number one man is never wrong. And then lastly, the other topic is strategic consensus. So that's a fancy term for, hey, what are the goals and the objectives of the team? So you can have a mental model. You can understand who needs what and who has what information. You can all perceive the situation that you're in the exact same and comprehend what's coming at you. But if anybody on that team has a different idea of the objective, you're going to have problems. So I'm going to give JP, I'm wrapping up here really quick, but I'll give you one example. Is actually a real life example. If you rewind back to 2004 in Fallujah, Iraq, April 2004, actually it was late March 2004, there was about 3 Blackwater contractors that got hemmed up in Fallujah, and they drug them through the streets and hung them from the bridge and all these things. Very graphic and very, very sad. Well, we were called, my team, I got a phone call that night or radio call, whatever, and said, hey, we need you to be at the Baghdad International Airport in the morning. Mind you, this was like 10 o'clock at night, and I've got two outstations. There was 10 of us. There's supposed to be 12, but I was down 2 guys. So I had 5 guys up north, 5 guys down south. Baghdad at the time was roughly square miles wise, kind of like Los Angeles or something, or at least the central part of Los Angeles. So I said, okay, no problem. But that sounds like no problem because there's only 10 of us. Well, I had about 100 indigenous soldiers assigned to me, and we had them split up. So I said, okay, no problem. So we show up the next morning, and we go and we get all of our guys, and we look like the Clampetts coming down the main supply route. And I mean, they had their sleeping bags and they had flashlights taped to their AKs, and it was a mess. So anyways, we get there and we get out to Fallujah, and I'll fast forward on this. We get it to Fallujah. We take over this place just south of Fallujah. It's a good story over beer sometime that's got all the details, but the bottom line is we set up and we were pretty good. But the problem was we were about 1,000 yards from the main part of the city. And if you ever looked at satellite imagery, it's like built up city, desert. But so there was these little villages between us and the main line. So I basically said, hey, we need to clear out these 25 buildings between us and the main city. And once we get close, we're probably going to take fire. We already knew it. And so we said, hey, we're going to put the indigenous soldiers and they're going to clear the buildings. We're going to stay out on the road and we're just going to follow them up. Once we get to this phase line, everybody just stop and wait until the indige catches up. Well, the indigenous soldiers did not get the memo. And so they kept going. Well, we couldn't not go too. And then the minute we crossed the phase line that we had planned, World War III broke out. So long story short, World War III breaks out. I would consider it a flow state as a team because we're driving these big trucks. They're not armored trucks, by the way. And all the buildings were about 8 foot tall. That's not a very tall building. And most of them were like not even finished. And so we were getting our trucks behind there, and they were just big enough to kind of hide a truck, not even the full truck. So we were literally I was actually driving one of the truck, have to back up so our guys could shoot, and they would start getting shot at, and you had to pull forward. And so all this within my truck everything got slowed down. I'm on the communication on the radio, calling the Marines saying, hey, remember how I said I would call you once we cross this phase line? He's like, yeah. I was like, go ahead and head this way. Hurry up every chance you get, and so they came to try to help us out, that flow state. So I know that was kind of a long story, but the point of it is if any of my guys, and one of them kind of decided, hey, our objective is to go into the city and start clearing buildings, we would have lost all of our indigenous forces. We would have lost all of us because there's no way we could have taken, because a couple of days later, the Marines sent about 200 guys in, even though I told them, hey, don't go in there. And they got their butts handed to them, and they turned around and they cleared one building and then left. So if they would have had a different strategic consensus, anybody on my team, everyone would have got killed. And the bright part of that whole story is not one person needed a Band-Aid after all that. Don't ask me how. So anyways,
I think a couple of the highlights, right, is this kind of the number one is never wrong. And I think that's a fascinating, I hear that in firefighters, obviously first responders, but Gunther and John, thoughts about that? You're still.
Yeah, I've actually experienced that. I did got to go do some biomechanics with a team down in Coronado, and they put me in a CQB situation, luckily with no live ammo or anything like that, but they stacked me up on the door. They're like, you're going. And I was like, whoa, okay. And they wanted me to experience all the stimulus, right? So everything, and what, we call vapor lock. And so, I went in, and it's the same thing. It's like, if I went left, the whole team, the second guy went right. The guy, third, fourth guy came in this way. And if I went right, the guy went left. And so I've experienced what you just said. I was laughing when you said that. I was like, I get that piece. But that's you have to, otherwise you'd be in serious trouble.
There's like no double guessing, right? That's part of that trust, that 100% trust of. It'd be interesting to see that in other, is that what the basketball greats teams do? And is that what the great jazz players do? It's like wherever they go, there's nobody's ever wrong, right?
Maybe jazz. Basketball these days, I'm not so sure about. I see like
not anymore,
individuals playing, so.
Gunther, you're still on mute. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm reminded of a statement by Miles Davis about, this isn't exact quote, but it's more like, in jazz, there are no mistakes.
Yeah.
And he followed that by saying that can't be corrected with the next note.
Right.
So I guess I have a question here from this conversation of the strategic consensus, right? Is part of this a trust, right? When we start talking about groups, are you giving a strategic consensus beforehand and allowing somebody to understand that, you've come to a level of preparation? Is that a necessity in that dialogue, or can you just naturally kind of gravitate towards people that feel similar and service that right, but at the same time just kind of have that unknown conversation of like, I'm I'm getting that consensus because I understand what we're up against.
Yeah. So Cody, the strategic consensus is it's in the academic literature. To be quite frank, it's probably not a word that's really, or a term that's really used much in the schoolhouse, because since we're military, everything is pretty lockstep. So our planning processes and all those things are pretty lockstep. So you'll have your mission, but you also have your intent and end state. And then trust does come into there, but you usually have discussions and back briefs and rehearsals and all these things. So everybody pretty much understands the mission, intent, and state. So if the mission doesn't go off quite right, well, the intent was to go get John out of that building. So we got to keep doing that. That was the end state. So even though there's only 2 of us alive, the end state is we've got to get John out of that building. So there's some trust involved, but there's not a whole lot of wiggle room as far as kind of making up your own on the team necessarily. That answers your question.
Quickly, Philip, do you guys ever look at any of the genetic testing for like the warrior gene? Have you heard of that aspect where?
I've heard of it, and we've done some stuff, and we were actually working with DARPA, and but SWIC, the schoolhouse, kind of withdrew from that. Time is their biggest thing, and so they were like, And even though it would have been really valuable to kind of test folks and follow them longitudinally, we often don't see the forest for the trees. And so the commanders there often will say, well, we don't have time for that. And it's like, you don't have time not to do it. We need to be doing this. And, 5 years from now, we'll have enough data to kind of understand how to assess, select, develop these folks. So bottom line is no. I mean, we're not doing it there. I'm not saying that CAG or some of the SF groups and stuff haven't individually done it, but at the schoolhouse institutionally, they're not really doing that right now.
It's amazing because I think we're at this time, we're also at a time when VR and AR and AI and all these technologies are coming into place where we have this exponential growth and capability to measure, biosensor, whether it's brain waves or physiologically, or even, like I said, VR, put yourself in situations. I know your stimulated training is kind of a big part of that. Maybe we jump in here to another type of tool, more of an ancient tool, and talk about psychedelics. And then we'll kind of let this whole conversation keep on growing. But I really want to pull in some of the rest of the audience. So I'm anxious to do that, as you can see. So let's do this. I'm going to invite Del up real quick. Del Jolly is somebody who, let's see, I'm going to add you to our room here, is working with a group, and I'm going to let you discuss it. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to get through a couple slides, if that's all right. I know it's kind of tough timing, but he's going to set up the conversation around psychedelics for us. And I'm going to start with this slide, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks, JP. I'll just kind of chat with everybody real quickly. Let's define psychedelics. And I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with it, but just the definition of a psychedelic drug are any of the so-called mind-expanding drugs that are able to induce states of altered perception and thought, frequently with heightened awareness of sensory input, but diminished control over what's being experienced. So when we are considering that, Humphrey Osmond is the psychedelic researcher in the 60s who was studying LSD for alcoholism, who coined the term psychedelic, and it's soul manifesting is what that means. And there's a little rhyme he put together: to fathom hell or soar angelic, try a pinch of psychedelic. So it's kind of a little background. This is psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, LSD, peyote, ibogaine, ayahuasca, and it's obviously a growing space right now. So what I'm going to talk about real quickly is the legal landscape. The legal landscape, this is affecting everybody here, whether or not you're thinking about this for business or research. Legally, this is going to affect everybody. And I was on the Decriminalized Denver team that decriminalized psilocybin in the city of Denver. That happened in May 7th, 2019, which was followed by Oakland, California, which decriminalized all entheogens, naturally occurring entheogens, which are psychedelics, another word for psychedelics. Oregon in the recent election legalized the therapeutic model statewide, which allows people who are experiencing depression and things of that nature to work with a therapist to use psychedelics. And then in the same election, Washington, D.C. had a majority vote. 76% of the voters decriminalized entheogens in Washington, D.C. So this is happening, and how it affects you is it's going to be very much like cannabis. Some cities will do it, some states will do it, and either you're going to be in one of those cities that allows this as an option to help with the cadre of things that they're researching this for: eating disorders, smoking cessation, the biggest one being depression and anxiety. And so this is happening whether you like it or not. It's gonna happen, very much like CBD, THC, cannabis. Canada has this gray area going right now where they're selling stuff online and whatnot. So everybody kind of needs to be aware of this, because this will be a breakthrough for mental health and wellness. So one of the other sides I was going to chat about is research, and that's growing tremendously. There's a lot of things happening. Like I said, it's being studied for obsessive compulsive disorder, smoking cessation. The biggest one is depression and some mental disorders. And then if we kind of get through the slides, pop through a couple of the slides, the business aspect, JP, who's a mentor of Unlimited Sciences, our psychedelic research nonprofit working with Johns Hopkins. We had a podcast called Unlimited Voices, and JP was talking to some of the business leaders. So this is also happening on a business level, whether it's organizations like Compass Pathways or Atai Life. He was talking to Christian Engemeyer, MindMed CEO J.R. Ron. So these things are
amazing. What was amazing to me, Del, was that we had that podcast last year, and I was learning, right? So I'm a beginner here and learning about what's going on in the research they've been doing, and really the seriousness of this. Gunther, if you would just jump in here and give us some context of, you lived this amazing time, and like I said in the beginning, probably one of the last standing, if you will, from the original studies back in Harvard. Just give us a little context of why now and what. Actually, I'll just give you the floor a little bit here.
Sure. Well, as you said, I believe I'm the last man standing from that original research team at Harvard. We were exploring the applications in criminal justice reform. We did a project that went on for 2 years at the maximum security Concord prison, taking and giving psilocybin to inmates, 10 to 12 in a room, locked in for 8 hours.
What year was this?
This was 1961, 62. And, under the auspices of Massachusetts Department of Mental Health and the Corrections Department, under an old rubric, which was basically using pharmaceutical drugs in trial experiments in prisons, where inmates were given time off their sentence for volunteering for these experiments. So we went in under that rubric, and it was quite extraordinary. I've talked about this in a couple of my podcasts, which are available online. We also explored, for example, applied mysticism, working on Good Friday with a group of divinity students from Andover Newton Theological Seminary at Marsh Chapel. This was run by one of our colleagues, Walter Pankey, who was an MD and a PhD in theology from the Harvard Theological School. And that was, again, with placebo and psilocybin, to seeing if we could stimulate and inculcate a mystical experience. I think about it now, and what we were doing in 1961 is pretty amazing. We were trailblazing and learning along the way. So that's part of my background, my pedigree, so to speak, in this area.
Was it pretty clear, Gunther, if you didn't get the you didn't get to,
Very clear, yeah.
placebo wasn't working, huh?
Well, it put the placebo question to rest for the most part. There are always a couple of exceptions, which is, again, speaks to the power of mind, if you will. So
maybe,
as I reflect now with this renaissance going on, as I said, being, coming with a perspective from that era and also the intervening years, I'm delighted by what's happening now. I also have some concerns about the commercialization of this, possibly hitting a point where it might impact the more sacred aspects of the use of plant medicines. We faced a very different set of circumstances back then because nobody knew what we were doing. We were learning what we were doing as we were doing it. And the legal and political issues at that time, which blew up, and we're very different than what we're facing now, where this is emerging into a very different context. But there's also always a yin and yang to everything. So you got to look at the upside, and you got to look at the downside. So I feel one of the things I can bring to the table here is my experience in identifying where we might take a wrong turn, basically, what we could do to anticipate potential issues that might, in a highly commercialized context, how that might limit or perhaps create some risks themselves. I'm thinking, for example, right now, one example I have is with the legalization of ketamine, which is legal for the most part. I've heard some stories about people going to a ketamine clinic paying $500 or $1,000 for an initial treatment where they get some support and then are given like sublingual ketamine to take home on their own without any supervision or support. And a lot of money is being charged for that, right? So that gives me pause, real pause. So I think we just need to look at this through the lens of the positive aspects of this, as well as the potential limiting aspects or possibly risk aspects of that. I fundamentally believe that these substances have a profound effect on consciousness. They can do a tremendous amount to alleviate human suffering, particularly trauma, whether it's war-induced or whatever it is, related depression, preparing people for their own death through the deep understanding of what the nature of life and death is. There are many different useful applications, and they deserve their day, so to speak, and it's happening now. But I remember going back years now, where we studied the traditional shamanistic traditions, and Tim coined the phrase set and setting. Set being the psychological expectation that you had going into the experience, setting being the actual environment. And of course, there's a drug purity and dosage factor involved as well. But set and setting account for 90% of the experience in psychedelics. Set and setting, frankly, accounts for 90% or more of the experience we have of daily life, or whatever we experience. It's going to be a function of what our expectation is and the setting in which it occurs. So we need to really pay attention to those two variables, however that's translated.
So I'm going to pause there for a second. Emily's going to throw up a poll for us because I'm just curious about the audience. Again, if you had asked me just a few years ago where I was on this, my answer is definitely different, but I'm just curious. Would love for, again, this is anonymous. So as much as you can, go ahead and select where you're at. Just give another minute. We're at about 60%, 75, 83. I think that's probably good enough for now. About 90% of you have answered. So go ahead, show those results. All right. Well, so we actually have some of those folks who've experienced at least once. It's our biggest group. And then, it's all right. Good. All right. So we still have a good spread. So I'm curious, Gunther, when you see that, and thinking about first the kind of the tools, how do you see? Talk a little bit about the benefits of this kind of potential. If you were able to, you mentioned before taking down the default mode network. What are some of the benefits of consciousness, or the human potential, the performance of consciousness in that? What are some examples you've seen?
Well, I could speak from my own personal experience. It's a good place to start any conversation. As I came out of my undergraduate education, majoring in philosophy and psychology, and coming out of an upper middle class Jewish academic family, I had a whole set of presuppositions, mental models, worldviews, beliefs, and values that are associated, with my tribe, if you will. Okay, and in my relatively elite status, going to Harvard and having gone to Kenyon College with a wonderful liberal arts background, all of that got suspended, if you will, in the first 2 weeks of my also got married, and I had my first psychedelic experience the first 2 weeks of graduate school. So, marriage aside, the first psilocybin experience was completely transformational. And I saw through the mental models and the psychological conditioning that had been pervasive in my life, which, by the way, also included a Holocaust survival, experience of being born in Germany in 1937, leaving in 1939 with my parents. I was 2 years old on a boat. It was probably, if not the last boat, certainly among the last boats to depart from Hamburg, and coming to the US as an immigrant family. With all of that traumatic scarring, I was in my mom's womb in Kristallnacht, for example, or I was born in Kristallnacht. It's 38. Okay, I was born in 37, but I was an infant, basically. So all of that conditioning was revealed to me, basically. All of it, in very powerful ways. Having said that, I have spent a good portion of my life, continuing now at the age of 84, continuing to unravel those beliefs, assumptions, worldviews, and values that were so deeply part of my default mode network, if you will. The contractive, conditioned consciousness that we all experience growing up. So I've continued to explore, and I'm exploring currently on a very selective basis how these substances can be utilized. And right now my focus is on my own death, my own mortality, and how I can prepare myself for that. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, wonderful. I want to do a quick breakout. Before I do, John, Philip, or Cody, any questions or thoughts, please?
There's a lot there. Yeah, it's like sorry, Philip, cutting in there. Yeah, my brother-in-law would have a lot to talk about on this subject if I could pull him into this conversation. He's Bodie Miller, the skier, and he's experienced the gamut of all that stuff. He'd be fine with me talking about it, but it has profoundly changed his performance, his ideas on society. We have many long conversations that go into the night with lots of red wine and stuff like that. And it's super fascinating to me that it changed his default mode network. He had it actually as a young kid, and you see this discussion that I didn't have that. So we have this really nice dialogue we can have with each other. I grew up in a very conservative family, and so he grew up in the opposite. And it's just such a fascinating world that we're able to talk about this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think we all need something to stop our default mode network, whether it's, whatever tool you can use and, whatever way you can try to figure out how to improve as a human. I think it's pretty cool.
Do you think, sorry, Thomas, you're going to go ahead.
No, that only thing I was going to jump on was the Gunther talked about, pros and cons of this stuff, and just for food for thought, for discussion within the groups or however, or later on down the road. When you look at the military, do you, if they introduce this type of thing into the military, there's a couple things there. Is it mandatory or is it not mandatory? And if it increases your performance, why not do steroids and some of these other things too? But once I retire within the next 12 months, hopefully, do they take all that stuff away? And so I go from superhero to dud because they take it away, they deprogram me, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of ethics to kind of unpack around some of these topics, especially in the military and things like that. So that's it.
I want to follow on what you're saying, because that's one of the things I think, Gunther, just is like a closing question, right? Like we talked about in one of the breakout rooms that we kind of had on our side of a habit, right? Getting a habit to shake free of that routine, to offer a new opportunity, to change your environment, to kind of give context to a different set of rules so that you could challenge your day differently. But, Gunther, from what you've suggested and what you've said, and from many of the things that you hear about these experiences, do you think that that's, kind of like, not necessarily a bucket list item, but almost like a need from a human standpoint, right? Were we designed to interact in our environment to get a hold of these kinds of substances in order to have those opportunities? Or is it just one of those fast, short methods into those moments, and we can find those other things through, being in a safe space for a long time, working on breathing drills and meditations? Like, where does that fit in the necessity versus habit versus tool set bucket?
I would say this, Cody, that the psychedelic experience with the right set and setting is by its very nature, ipso facto, is a massive pattern interruption. Okay? But one thing we do know about the default network and about conditioned responses is that those neuronal pathways are very well established and will continue to operate unless there's ongoing follow-up work. So under the best of circumstances, the psychedelics can provide a window, a portal into a level of inner freedom. It moves us from waking consciousness, our ordinary day-to-day waking consciousness, which can be viewed as a kind of robotic consciousness, frankly, into a mystical cosmic consciousness. And so you can have that mystical experience, but there's an intervening level of consciousness, which you could call self-remembering or being consciousness, which is the moment-to-moment daily practice of presence awareness. And you can experience that with the psychedelics. It'll move you through that into the mystical realm, but operating at the mystical realm in daily life is not very useful. Okay? It doesn't really work. But what works in all kinds of areas of human life, if we understand what it actually is this moment-to-moment capacity for self-remembering, for being consciousness, for presence awareness. And the applications of that are legion with respect to performance or any number of other areas of application. That's what I believe we need to concentrate on. And that is going to be a function of the follow-up, if you will. What we do every day, moment to moment, in our waking consciousness, so to speak, to elevate that to a omnipresent, omnipotent understanding of our own being, if you will. That sounds kind of vague, but when you're in a flow state, that to me is basically, that's not the mystical consciousness, that is the state of moment-to-moment presence awareness. The question is, how do we pursue that? How do we address that? Meditation practice is one way. Unfortunately, meditation practice also requires a special set of circumstances of sitting on a pillow in a quiet room, basically. And then the dilemma is, what happens when you get off the pillow and you go have an argument with your wife or your publisher or your children? So how does this all apply to daily life? What tools can we use moment to moment in our daily life to inculcate a capacity for presence awareness?
Hey, JP, can I just chime in for a second and
Yes.
share some of my experience?
Please, I'm going to open it up to the floor here. So we're good. This has been an amazing conversation. I'd love to just, again, bring in everybody now. So I'm going to kind of open up the gallery view here.
Awesome.
If you guys want to see more,
This is Stephen Wong from Toronto. I just want to share some of my experience with flow state and almost be devil's advocate in some way. I've been studying flow and practicing and using it on my athletes for about a decade now. Some UFC fighters, some Olympic champions, NHL players as well. And so I'm on the other spectrum, whereas, you know, as far as psychedelics and all of that, is something that I've never, even alcohol, never touched. I was on the Canadian national team for Taekwondo, national champion as a junior. And so I've been studying for over 4 decades. And when I was on the national team, a few of my teammates were caught for drinking and they were kicked off the team. So it was very strict. If you're touching any of that stuff, you're automatically off the team. So I never started drinking. I never tried drugs. I've never done any of that. And I understand what Gunther is saying with, you know, I know what it does with the serotonin and all of that, but it's, you know, I've encountered a lot of people. I'll give you an analogy where, you know, I'll be confronted and people know my martial arts background. I was a heavy competitor. I like I said, I train UFC athletes as well. And, you know, people will say, what are you gonna do with a 45? And when I pull a 45 on you? And, you know, my response was always, you know, when I'm this close to the guy, I'm like, okay, well, pull it out right now. Let's see what you can do, because I don't leave my weapons at home. You know, my training is always, you know, these are my weapons right here. Where's your 45 right now? So with the psychedelics, when I'm training a UFC athlete, for example, we have to train them. I train them in the aspect to be able to trigger flow, or be in that zone, or to tap into that level of awareness, to go into that brainwave activity, to slow everything down without the psychedelics, because that's not, you won't pass the drug test. You won't be able to function. You won't be able to perform if you need that to trigger that state. I understand what Gunther and everyone else is saying about the psychedelics, and I do believe in the benefits, but I'm on the other side of the fence, where there are many flow triggers, and everyone's been in flow. I tell my athletes all the time, 2-3-year-olds go into flow state. You see them coloring sometimes, and you see them coloring normally, and they'll be all outside the lines. But then you'll watch. If you have kids, you'll see sometimes just your kid, a 3-year-old, a little toddler, and they're like so focused, and you see what they're coloring. It's like right within the lines. It's 100 times better than what normally would be. It's because they're in that state of flow. And next thing you know, 45 minutes later, they're finishing it up. Meanwhile, normally their attention span is 2 minutes.
Stephen,
They're scribbling all over.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So we're talking about multiple things here. We got the flow. Thoughts on any responses or thoughts on that from the panel? Yeah, Gunther.
Let me respond quickly. Stephen, I'm a 50-year practitioner of Tai Chi Chuan, Xingyi, and Bagua. Yep. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And for example, in some of our preparation drills, we do a Wuqi standing practice, 20 or 30 minutes of standing in a vertical posture with the right structural alignment, allowing the soft tissue and the fascia to drain down into the floor. And major athletes who are on unbelievable condition can't do that for more than 5 or 10 minutes. Absolutely. And it's really amazing, because if you know how to align yourself properly, including your breath and your inner attention, you easily go into a flow state, because the opposite of the flow state is incredible pain and contraction. And you learn relatively quickly of how to change that internal trigger by the practice of song, the practice of relaxed attention, if you will. But there's a very strong psychophysical component to that involves the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments, the bones, the soft tissue. It's very exact, actually. And you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. I love Tai Chi Chuan. So I've been studying Hung Gar style Kung Fu for 35 years as well. And I touched on Tai Chi for about 4 or 5 years.
Great. Awesome. Well, another question or comment, would love to open up. We only have a few minutes left. We're kind of at 8 o'clock already here Mountain Time, but I'd love to just get maybe 3 or 4 small discussions. We'll keep them brief. Just jump in.
Hey, I'll comment real quick on the discussion going on in the chat. Coming from a pretty high-end military organization, I do not see a possibility of using psychedelics as a training enhancer because we don't want to take a tier 1 operator and change his worldview, $1 million into training. And I know that probably sounds callous, but in my mind, that's just straight up the truth. So when we've messed friends up and all of us a little too much and we're retiring, that's probably the time to hit the very controlled, supported psychedelics for recovery, after the war, if you will. That's it.
Yeah, Alex, I totally agree with you. And that's kind of the same angle I have with pro athletes, right? They can't do that. They can't use that to get into, to be an advantage.
Right. Great point.
I think to Stephen's thought is it's almost like a cheater window for those of us who haven't done the training to find that level of peace and connectedness that makes you fall into how you relate to everything around you, which in the whole Tai Chi and martial arts realm, there's such an awareness of the whole that you understand that. And so it's for those of us who haven't had that level of commitment, it's almost like this is a window to that incredible state that you can bring yourself to. And that's kind of the beauty of it. We can find it through other avenues, but not to that level. And there's a peace, there's like a spiritual world peace connectedness, just a part of the universe component to it that I think is helpful to the rest of the population that doesn't have a job that operates at that level, that can just calm us all down and make us all feel less combative, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Actually, is Sarah still on with helium?
Yeah, I'm here. Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey, Sarah, welcome.
Hey.
So I know you're working on some new technologies with some of the same benefits, right? You want to talk about that?
Yes, specifically, as you said, with, a less combative, we were in the prisons today, actually, using helium with some of the offenders there. And it's drugless training that's using EEG feedback in augmented virtual reality environments. So you can actually see your flow so that you can learn to self-regulate it. And it's completely drugless. However, we are looking to use it for neuroplasticity before a psilocybin experience or after a psilocybin experience. We've been told that using VR or AR during it would not be advised. I'd be curious what your panel thinks about that, of using a VR or AR during the experience as opposed to before and after.
So yeah, so just so I understand, the idea would be almost like a remote support after you get home, kind of the thing, kind of alluding to what Gunther was saying before. Is that what you're thinking about? Is it a support mechanism after an experience?
Before. But I would be curious what your panel thinks of using it either during or after.
Go ahead, Gunther.
I would definitely see the potential after. Of course, then the question is, who's programming the VR? What's the content and who's programming it? That would apply to the pre as well. That goes back to the set and setting question. One of the interesting things that happens with psychedelics is that you have a realization that your ordinary consciousness is virtual, that life as we normally live it is actually virtual, that real life is actually not experienced very much. And that goes back to the the question of the stages of consciousness, what I call the being consciousness. That's real. Life is only real when I actually experience that amness. Okay? The rest is actually virtual. So it's like a virtual model of a virtual reality, actually. It's one step removed. Nevertheless, I think it could be very helpful in supporting in post-psychedelic, in supporting that experience. But then again, it's a function of what the content is and who's programming it.
That's great. Yeah, we'd be looking for research partners who'd want to play with our tech.
Great. Yeah, it's a great, thanks for highlighting that. We do have amazing people obviously here. If you want to connect with folks, that's what this is all about. Finding research, finding investors, finding people that want to venture together, challenge each other, debate each other. So we probably have time for one more closing comment / discussion.
JP, if I could, I want to hit off of what Gunther just said there. And, you know, I've heard multiple conversations from a consciousness level, right? Of the essence of virtual or this hallucinated consciousness, right? And then the other version, right? The panpsychism. And so I'll say I sit on that kind of cloud of conversation of talking about these wave connections and points and things like that. And so from that conversation that you just brought up of how this consciousness is not, that soul consciousness, but the virtual representation. How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on panpsychism in that conversation? How it kind of incorporates this flow state of being connected one with another towards this, general experience consciousness?
Are you asking me, Cody?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So could you just define what you mean by pan consciousness? So we're operating with the same set of terms.
Under the notion that the fundamental base unit from a standpoint of every particle would include some portion of consciousness such that there would be a consciousness throughout all things.
Yes. Well, from the point of view that I'm speaking, consciousness is all there is. And that in order to give more precise meaning to that, you have to understand at what level we're talking about, at what level of materiality. Okay? From the standpoint of quantum physics or even Newtonian physics, it's a matter of what frequency and what the level of the frequency is, whether how dense it is on a material plane or how refined it is on much more subtle planes. But it's all consciousness. And from the standpoint of our daily life, what lens are we looking through when we're living and speaking and emoting, right? What is the lens that we're looking through? Like right now, I'm looking through a lens of reading glasses that have a 2.5 diopter. So I know there's a distortion factor there that allows me to read the screen better. But that's just a metaphor for what we're all looking through lenses every moment of our life. What is the nature of the perspective that we're looking through, the lens we're looking through? The psychedelics allow us to realize that we're all conditioned by these, patterns. And it gives us a momentary freedom from those. Enough freedom to realize that something is possible for human beings beyond the conditioned lenses that we're looking through. And there are exceptions to that, of course, because when we look into the eyes of our beloved, or a beautiful sunset, or we're in extreme danger, or any number of other variables that crack that lens, they crack that egg, if I change the metaphor, and we have a momentary experience of something that's very different. And that is often associated with the flow state. But the question then comes back, how do we bring that to our daily life? How do we take it out of a narrow context and apply it to our daily life? And the psychedelics have no answer for that.
Right. Everybody, I'm going to be the bad guy here and start to wrap it up. If you want to get in touch with us, here's some ways to do that. Take a screenshot. Of course, I think Emily has already put some of the contact information into the chat. If you want some contact information between each other, just let Emily know, and we'll get that to you. I am so grateful for John and for Philip, and for Gunther, and of course, Cody for co-hosting with me here. Appreciate everybody. And Gunther, I think you summed it up beautifully there. Let's go out there and make sure we really experience this, and not just through the lens that we've built above, but try to find ways of looking away, through those lenses and taking away the lenses, if you will. So I appreciate it.
So, hey, JP, real fast, thanks for having me. I have a last little sentence here that I came across this little thing the other day, and it says, from the beginning of the Big Bang to the end of the proposed death of the last particle of the universe, life only has a chance of 1/1000th of a billionth of a percent. We're literally just a speck of this whole universe. So that always blows me away to think about, like, we're talking about consciousness, talking about all this stuff, but it's like we are just this little blip of time that we're all here and discussing this stuff. It's kind of crazy, It's like we get wrapped up in our material lives, but it's so much bigger than that, It's like we're just here for a moment. So that's my parting thought.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Philip, anything else? Thanks for being here.
No, man, I just appreciate the opportunity to be with such great folks, and feel very humbled. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Gunther, thank you. Alex, great to see you, my friend. Gail, thanks for being here. Steven, thanks for joining us tonight. Zach, man, you were quiet. Next time, calling you up. Alice, thanks. Hey,
thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, Del, thank you so much for jumping in and setting the tone there for the psychedelics. Appreciate it. Cody, thanks as always.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I appreciate it, guys.